Hola, you are listening to First Gen Healing, a podcast on Latinx healing and awakening journeys. My name is Priscilla Luna. I am your host, and I'm actually without a guest today, so it's just myself. Usually on the episodes, I have a guest. But today, with it being a week that is centered around gratitude, I wanted to first and foremost say thank you to all of you guys that are listening. I know my podcast is in the beginning stages, and so I truly appreciate everyone who is tuning in, who is supporting, who is following the podcast or the channel. You know, putting yourself out there and starting on new platforms is always intimidating because you always start from the number zero, right? And so, it's something that I've now started to get used to, but it's still intimidating and it's still so cool to see the way that something can start from, an idea and then develop into something. And wow, this has developed into something so beautiful. And I hope that you see it. I think that those who have been on the podcast see the vision in some way, and I'm so thankful for you guys too. Those of you that have participated, thank you, thank you, thank you for believing in this passion project and for being a part of it. To those of you who have taken the time to message me and let me know which episodes resonate or what has helped you, like, maybe something that we said in a certain episode shifted a perspective or a belief for you. That is like so amazing to me. It is the purpose of what I'm doing. It's for us. And of course, there's like a personal reason behind doing this, but the biggest reason is for all of us who are on these journeys to find community, to feel connected to like-minded people, and to realize that we are not alone on these journeys. That there's a lot of us who are coming into realizations of certain things, who are feeling alienated by certain realities or circumstances, who are growing, who are just healing in many, many different ways. And so, once again, thank you so much for being a part of it. In today's episode, I would like to expand on certain things that maybe I haven't yet. So, we are actually 5 episodes in plus the introduction. If you haven't listened to it, I invite you to do so. And I want to talk through it. I put that out there. It honestly was really hard for me to record in video form, so I didn't. Every time that I tried, I would, get teary eyed and cry a little bit. But today I'm feeling a little bit stronger. So hopefully I can refer back to it in a way that is helpful and that helps you see a little bit more of where I'm coming from, the intent of this podcast. I do want to maybe go back to the intro, and in the beginning of it, I mention our upbringings, right? Now, the term first gen, let's talk about that a little bit. First gen can mean a lot of different things, and there's actually different definitions and there's debates about it. For me, I don't necessarily have very strong opinions on who is a first gen and who's not. I think that the first gen term is maybe like a signal boost to those of the people that I think would benefit from this podcast. Same thing with Latinx. I know that the term Latinx, there is sometimes controversy around that. There are people who agree and disagree with the term. For me, it's an inclusive term that also encompasses the type of people that I would like to share my content with. So, with that being said, there are such a huge number of experiences that would fall under those two terms. And I completely understand that. And I want you to know that I don't by any means think that I completely understand the experience of everyone. In fact, in just these 5 episodes and the ones that I've recorded that are to be posted in the next month, for example, I think they're a true like manifestation of the fact that everyone has such different journeys, that even the way that we interpret healing or awakening and the way that we experience that is so different. And that's what I want. Is I'm hoping that those of you that are listening, listen with an open mind, an open heart, not being judgmental toward it, I hope that this podcast encourages you to have that type of mindset, a curious mindset, instead of being very black and white about things. I think if there's anything that I've learned in my awakening is that phrase, I don't know who says it, but the more I know, the more I know I don't know. I resonate with that so much. There's so much that we don't know, so many layers that are constantly at play. And as humans, we just get such a small snapshot of things. And I think the more open minded we are, the more we are able to perceive and see. But even then, we're limited, as human beings, we have our limited human being perspective. But I say all this just because there are people that have been on the podcast or will be that were not born here, or people that were born here, or people whose parents were born here, right? And so technically they wouldn't all be considered of the same generation, right? For me, to be honest, like I mentioned, I'm not as strict in terms of those terms. For me, we all share similarities in some parts of the journey. And I want to say this because also at some point I received feedback like, you're discrediting those of us who are actual first gens who don't have papers in the US. And I don't know how to go about this more respectfully, but I truly don't want to offend anyone by using the term first gen. I have thought about this a lot, to be honest, and I think it still encompasses who I think it's calling in the right people. I hope that you don't feel like by any means that I'm discrediting your experience, and I hope that you feel welcome in this community because I'm also including people who have had that experience. I just want to put that out there. Same thing with Latinx. To me, I just want to be inclusive of genders, cultures. I don't want to exclude. And so I hope that with using the term Latinx, that it's something that we can get past, because I do see a lot of people who are trying to do good be put down by people instead of uplifted. A little bit about my upbringing, and I mentioned it in the introduction a little. It's just that we become little adults. So at least for me and a lot of the first gens that I interact with, I have seen that this is the case. There were a lot of us who took on the burdens that we saw our parents go through, and we wanted to be helpful. And so instead of being a child and being irresponsible and running around and playing, we were the ones that were making sure mom and dad weren't upset, or that if they were too tired that we would do something, or that we would take care of our siblings. We internalized a lot of things instead of externalized, and that may not be the case for you, and that's what I'm saying. I can only share from my experience. But as a reminder, that's why the podcast is here, to highlight and showcase everyone, many different experiences, that may not be exactly like mine, but are still just as important and impactful. I see that there are a lot of people who question the need for healing, and what they stand on is, well, your parents did such big things for you to be here. How dare you say that it wasn't enough and that it was bad and that you need to heal from it? And so, in a sense, I felt intimidated by that mentality, not because I believe in it or stand behind it, but because I know it comes with very deep and raw feelings, and or beliefs that are deeply, deeply rooted. And I understand that. In fact, up until my mid-20s, I thought the exact same way. I had ingrained in my psyche how much my parents had done to be in this country and given up, and I saw how hard they worked, and I didn't dare complain about it. Instead, from a very young age, I took on the role of being the mature one and going after the American dream and not complaining and doing it fast and going from stepping stone to stepping stone, running through, and doing everything possible to make my parents proud, for them to feel like what they had done was worth it. For me, that was like a fire that burned inside of me. I wanted to retire my parents. I wanted for them to be proud. I thought that their sacrifices were so big. I saw them work 2, 3 jobs. And so when I was chasing after that dream, it became really confusing to me how lonely, sad, miserable at some points I felt. What I know now that I didn't know then is that underneath that layer of you should just be grateful for all of the things that your parents did for you, it was kind of like a stopper or the tip of the iceberg. And so if you heard back from others when you were expressing your feelings, just be grateful, don't complain, your parents did XYZ for you, that's the tip of the iceberg, right? If you listen to that and you ignored your own intuition telling you something is wrong, things need to change, you deserve better, if you ignore it, then you're actually ignoring a full iceberg that's below. So, I don't know. I work in visuals, by the way. You'll get to know that in the podcast. I'm always painting pictures, or I get visuals, and so I share them. But in order for you to be able to heal or be able to go on this journey, you have to be able to validate your own experience. Because unfortunately, in our community, sometimes there's this big, like, the saying, right? Sé agradecido, be grateful. You don't know what we had to go through. And that alone prevents people from healing things that don't even have to do with the first gen experience that can affect anyone, right? Which is like mother wounds, father wounds, being a parentified child. So there's a lot more to it, than just being grateful for the physical things. And I hope that this podcast allows you to see that, because it was really important for me to get past that. I could have gotten stuck there, and in fact I feel like I did. I got stuck there for 25 years. I couldn't see past that. And so I was stuck in the guilt and the shame of like, why am I feeling like something needs to change, but also feeling like this immense responsibility to my parents' story and not disappointing them, and being the good girl that I had internalized for a very long time, right? So there's that. Then there's also the aspect of awakening, and I want to dig a little bit more into that, because in the introduction I just kind of briefly went over the fact that the last 6 years have been a period of healing and awakening for me. Awakening is something that I'm getting used to talking about. I'm not honestly like super used to talking about it, because it's an experience that I feel like I've gone through on my own. My close friends know about it, but I haven't also completely externalized what I have gone through, including like with my family and stuff. And so it's not something that I'm used to talking about a lot. But the awakening piece of it all is, for example, I mentioned I graduated high school at 16, college at 21, got my dream job by 25. And I said that to show you that the same fire, the desire to make my parents proud that had me achieving all of these things, is the same fire that led me to burnout. And coming back to validating your own experience, having grown up watching my parents work 2, 3 jobs, the to the extent that they took it was impressive and is humbling, to be honest. There are memories that I have of how deeply I internalized having to be their helper. Unfortunately, my parents would work very late. They would start their day very early and end super late. And as soon as I started driving, for example, I would take over the driving duties, because I had seen them many of times, like almost falling asleep behind the wheel. These are the types of experiences that, like, you see and you're like, how could I ever say that I feel burnt out when I've seen so much more, when I'm not at that point where I'm not working in that way, you know? And so, coming back to validating your own experience, I had to validate the fact that I felt burnt out. And for me, I think it happened, since I was kind of like speeding up through life, I think it happened quicker than sometimes it can happen for people. But I'm going to try my best to include the awakening piece and how it came into play. I had been working in corporate, let's say, for 4 years, and I was already feeling like, how the heck do people do this? How do they work for 50 years? And how do they only live for the weekends? This makes no sense to me. Cue in spiritual awakening, right? Soul searching period. I think also the fact that I was in human resources, that was my job. It was like the place where I would hear people complain about their jobs. And I would talk to these people, usually, older than me. And they would tell me, yeah, I've been here for 10 years and I hate it here. And I would be like, why don't you leave? Yeah, I'm going to leave, blah, blah, blah. And then they wouldn't. And then the next year would come and they would complain about the same thing. And so I don't know if that was part of what sped things up for me, the realizations, but I already felt caged in. I was like, I can't do this for the rest of my life. I just don't find like the meaning behind all of this. At first, I was really passionate about human resources and all of this stuff, but eventually I was just like, I felt caged in. I started to have thoughts of like, if I was the only human on this earth, what would I do? I started to question everything, I questioned society, family, why we want houses and cars, and is it all necessary? Is that what I want? And at first, for me at least, when I started the awakening piece, I started to learn about the law of attraction and affirmations and manifestations. And here's the tricky part about that is like whatever your standard mode is, if it hasn't changed, you're going to apply whatever you learn in the same way. So I was this overachiever, right? And how I used this new knowledge as I was barely awakening was, oh, now I'm going to use manifestation to call in more achievements, right? To call in money and a big house and a car. At the same time, there was this awakening happening where it was making me question, well, why do you want a big house? Like, is it because you as a human, like your own individual self truly wants one? Or is it because of society that's telling you that that's what you want? Do you care about material things? At the same time, like my path was always climbing the corporate ladder. So every year in my first 4 years of career, I was getting promoted. And then on my fourth year, I didn't get a promotion. I left and I got my dream job. And in my dream job, I became super miserable. And so then questioning, do you actually care, Priscilla, about titles? Right? Like, are titles actually important to you? Now, I mentioned, I was in HR. So I'm also wondering if, like, that also sped things up for me because in HR at a corporate level, which is where I've always worked, you get to see a lot of movement within the company. And so from maybe from the aspect or perspective that I had, the bird's eye view, I saw how titles did not equal better people. There were people that were making 200,000 that were not people that I looked up to be honest, While there were people that were making 40,000 or I don't know, 50,000 that had been in their job for 10, 15 years, really cared about their teams, really cared about their job. And to me, it just didn't make sense. I started to realize it's all not an illusion, but it's all, I don't want to use like awakening, like terms, let's say, because then you would say like the matrix or a construct or, but it kind of is. It kind of is. It's kind of like this, it's like I don't know how to explain it, to be honest. But if you're on your journey, maybe you already understand, right? You start to see through what's already set. You know, as a society, we've kind of established these roles and these ways of being and operating, the rules of the game, you know. And I started to see through that, and I was just like, oh my God, okay. As this is happening, I face my burnout era. You know, the burnout era for me looked like extreme anxiety, depression, but because in my childhood, I did not learn to lean on my parents. Instead, sometimes we would lean on each other. You know, I was kind of like their partner in a way. I was the translator. I was the one, you know, I've had memories of like my mom was going to school and I would read through her essays, you know. Instead of her reading through mine, she would be like, oh, can you just check my essay or my email or my text? And so I would proofread their stuff, you know. And I think little things like that were clues to inner child me of, oh, you're not here to rely on them. In fact, like, they rely on you. So when I went through my awakening, when I went through my healing journey, I didn't my way of operating was not to lean on my parents, right? Or on anyone else, to be honest. It was like, okay, now you have to figure this out. But basically, I was in my dream job, and it was not unusual for me to be one of the youngest in the room, in a role, in a company, you know. It wasn't that like caused all of this, I don't think. What I was doing in my dream job was traveling from business to business. So I was a consultant, and I had a number of businesses that were assigned to me. They were small businesses, and I was working with business owners, and I would go to their locations, and I would, you know, talk to them about HR. I would do like a review of their HR practices, and then I would help them through that. At that time, I didn't speak in the language of energies and, you know, empath and all of that stuff. But what I think was actually happening is I was constantly every day having to expose myself to new environments, new energies, new people over and over and over again. And my system was just oversaturated. Now, couple that with not having good self care, self love practices, because that's not a priority for a lot of our family members and a lot of our parental figures, right? So there was no self care. There was this complete entrega to my job. And together, it created what I call the perfect storm. I managed my own hours. I didn't have to go into an office. I also was kind of on call, you know, because these business owners could call me throughout the day. So it was so much unpredictability. And my system was just burnt out, you know. Again, I didn't have like the courage to say I'm burnt out to my family. I didn't even know what that was, to be honest. And there was no way for me to like validate that, because I was not working a laborious job. I was not like doing the things that I had seen my parents do. So in my world, it was not comparable, and therefore it was not valid, right? But what was actually happening behind doors was I would go to work. I lived on my own. So I would go to work, be anxious the whole day. I had to cope in different ways. I had always, when I was driving, turn on the air so it would be cold, so it would be hitting my face, so I wouldn't get like an anxiety attack. I had peppermint that I would always smell because it would feel like I couldn't breathe. And um, then I would get home and I would numb out and I would watch TV. I picked up smoking. I would smoke, and I would eat a lot, to be honest. And then I would go to sleep, and I would do it again, and then again, and then again. And I did have moments where I spoke out. You know, I would speak to my manager or to my parents, and what I received was just, it's a new job. You just need to get used to it. You just need to get used to it. And I didn't get used to it up until the point of about a year in, where I got my first panic attack. And the first episode of the podcast actually talks about that. It talks about my first panic attack, so you can go listen to that. It's with Yasmin at Yasol, and we talk about our experience with that and how our body sometimes signal boosts or tells us, hey, something is wrong, something needs to change. and how we can stop listening to it or ignore it. We're not taught to listen to it, right? And how that signal or that calling gets louder and louder. So for me, that first experience, you can listen to where it happened, was a waking, like a turning point for me. I realized I never want to experience that again. And something inside of me told me, like, things have to change, Priscilla. And I listened. Up until this point, I was the most responsible person. I was financially independent, and so I had never really done super irresponsible things. But something in me told me I had to leave that job. It was not good for me. And there was so much fear around that. It was like, oh my God, what I've been working towards, isn't going to fulfill me. And so, what now? What's next? What is this? Why am I going through this? Throw on top, these existential crisis questions of, I'm a human, like, why are there societal structures that feel so constricting in a way, So there's just like a lot happening all at the same time. And I quit. I quit that job. I left it without a backup. And in that time, I had a little bit saved up, and I took it upon myself to do some soul searching, and I started to be creative. I had these makeup looks that I wanted to try, and I started to do like art, like, oh, I'm just gonna paint, or, just honestly, it was a lot of firsts that I allowed myself to have. Very low budget, of course, but like there was a point where I got to a very low amount in my bank account, and I would count like the tomatoes and the limones and like everything to the T, but I knew that it was going to be worth it. I didn't know why, I just knew it would be. In the end, I didn't find what was next for me, but I did do a lot of things, that just ideas that came to me intuitively, that I actually now teach some of my clients, my coaching clients, to do, to find themselves and to get to know themselves. So how cool, right? Now I'm realizing, like, I didn't necessarily know what the point of it was, but now I know that even in those moments, those 3 months that happened where I was unemployed, no backup, and I didn't want to go back to corporate, those exercises that I intuitively told myself to do, like define my own version of success, or just really dig deep into who I was, is now helping others as I coach them. Wow. How cool and magical. Well, for me, I ended up with $0.00 in my bank account. And at that time, I had started then applying to corporate jobs again. I had not found what was next for me outside of corporate. But I got to 000. I worked for delivery services for a week. Thankfully, after that, I got a job and I got my first paycheck. And so then I went back into corporate for a little bit. But in the back of my mind, I already knew this is not my end goal. What I did come out of from then was knowing titles don't matter to me. How much I make does not matter to me. Obviously, it matters, but it's not like number one goal. I'm not going to be someone that's chasing millions and millions of dollars. That's just not what I came here to do. At that time, I had a camera already, and I would record little videos. In fact, I started doing that in 2017. And at first, I was going to be the hippie Mexican, and I was going to share what it was like going vegan as a Mexican. And I'm no longer vegan or vegetarian. I do plan on going back to that, but it was something that I wanted to do, like how, the things that people would tell me being Mexican, and hearing like their funny comments that they would make. But anywho, I left with some sense of not necessarily where I was going, but a big sense of who I was and what my end goal was and wasn't, very general, but at least I knew, like, I'm no longer pursuing climbing the corporate ladder. I'm going to leave it there. I think, I could go into a number of things, but I'm just going to pause here, and hopefully this episode helps you see a little bit more about my own journey, where I'm coming from when I speak about certain things in the episodes, and also help you understand that my number one priority with the podcast is so that you see different journeys. Because when I was going through my awakening, the type of podcast that I was listening to did not share my cultural background or parts of my journey. I resonated with them in terms of the awakening piece or healing, but I also knew that there was a lot of differences in how we grew up and what we went through and our experiences of life and perspective. So for me, the podcast is or I just had this download of how cool would it be for someone who is on that journey that wants to hear different journeys and all from fellow Latinx people, how cool would that be? And so that's why I created the podcast. And that is the goal with it, is to highlight different stories and for you to find yourself, if you resonate, then also to have resources. Every guest that I have on, I ask them what their favorite mindful tool is or habit, books that they've read or songs that they've listened to. So I hope that you find that helpful. And if you ever have feedback, please know, I recognize there's always room for improvement, and I would love to hear your feedback, whether it's good or bad, whether you have ideas, let me know. The point of this all is community and is, for all of us to know that we exist out here in the world. We may not be in the same state or city or location, but hopefully this starts to make you feel like there is a lot of us out there. And even those creators that are not necessarily speaking on healing and awakening, you probably already saw, I've had some of them on the podcast that are still going through their journeys. It's not their focal point, but we get to highlight that on this podcast, which I think is really cool too. So feel free to send your feedback to me through social media. I would be happy to hear. And I hope that we can continue to build this community together. And I truly hope that it helps some of you guys in your journey, honestly. I mentioned it a little bit, but I am a coach for first gens on their healing and awakening journeys. And to be honest, I have allowed that to transform a little bit as I go. I feel like I'm constantly adjusting who it is that I want to help and how I can help them. But I think at the core of it all, I am a coach who wants to empower first gens to do and be what makes them feel best. And sometimes that requires boundary setting or soul searching or adding creativity to your life or being a little bit more open-minded or letting go of limiting beliefs, changing your perspective on things. It can be a combination of a lot of things. But at the end of the day, that's what's at the root of what I'm trying to do, is empower first gens and allow for them to take off the burdens that sometimes you carry so proudly, which I'm happy that you do, but that are sometimes really holding you back, and to reevaluate them and see how they can maybe transform or change so they no longer weigh so heavy on you, and so that you can continue on your life and also find fulfillment within your own life, aside from other people's expectations, which I'm not saying they're all bad, but to be honest, what's going to give you that true fulfillment is finding your own voice. It's listening to it. It's following it, and having a beautiful connection with yourself. It's caring for yourself. It's loving yourself. That truly gives you that feeling of fulfillment. And then the cherry on top is making your parents proud, making their sacrifices worth it, being a good daughter or son, husband, wife, etc. I would love to be a part of your journey. It's an honor every time I get to be a part of a first gen's journey. I think too, I'm coming into the realization that some internal work has to be done outside of what I can offer. And simply because I recognize there are some deeply rooted things, that I think sometimes in our journeys first have to be taken care of before we can jump into the other part of the soul searching and all of that. In reality, they always coexist. They're always happening at the same time. Healing, awakening the therapy and all of that kind of stuff. But I think at the end of the day, my services complement the journey, and I'm so excited to share with you guys some of the things that I've been working on, all stemming from like what do I wish would have been available to me when I was going through this journey. One of them being having like a workbook or some sort of guide that walks me through some of these aspects, like I want to get to know myself better. I already have worked through some of the hard stuff with a therapist or a counselor or psychiatrist, etc. I'm ready to get to know myself on a different level. I'm working on something for you if that's where you're at in your journey. So stay tuned. Make sure you follow me. You can follow me at First Gen Healing on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. And then also I've created socials for the podcast. So you can follow the podcast on First Gen or at First Gen Healing Podcast. So, yeah, make sure you're following so that you can stay tuned for what I'm going to be sharing. But a lot of amazing things are coming in the future. I think in another episode, if you guys are interested, let me know if I should talk about the journey of actually creating a podcast and what that's been like and connecting with fellow Latinx creators, which I will just say right now has been an amazing experience, better than I could have imagined, to be honest. Everyone has been so awesome, so easy to work with, and I did not expect that. So thank you, thank you, thank you once more to everyone who has been a part of it so far. So I'm going to go ahead and close it out, First Gens. If you enjoyed this episode, if I can ask you to please help me spread the word of this podcast, share it with your fellow Latinx humans or fellow First Gen humans so that they too can come and be a part of this community. I would greatly appreciate it. Please like the episode, subscribe, do all the things, comment. I will make sure to read them and respond. Thankfully, we're at the beginning stages, so it's not an overwhelming amount, but I would really appreciate it if in some way my content has helped you, that you please help me spread this podcast, to those who may benefit from them. So thank you so much, guys. Cuídense mucho. And remember, First Gens, I love you. I love me. And I can't wait for you to love yourself.